Good afternoon, gardeners. It's Saturday, April 3rd, and we are 3 weeks past our average last frost date here on the southeastern coast of North Carolina, and the garden is coming alive. The fruit trees are all budding out, and everything looks great. Looked great. Everything looked great until last night. We had a very, extremely, almost unprecedented late hard freeze come through the area last night, way behind our last frost date. And, well, things don't look as good today as they did when I went to sleep last night. So I want to take you through the garden and show you what can happen when you get a very late hard freeze in your area. Now, I want to warn you, this video is not for the faint of heart. This video contains adult content, graphic images, and psychological nudity. So viewer discretion is advised because what I'm about to show you is not pretty. So all of us that live on the eastern half of the United States have known for a while now that a late shot of cold Arctic air was going to come down at a very late time, and we were going to have unusually cold evening lows. And a couple of days ago I uploaded a video, which I will link to above, that was all about how to protect your gardens and plants that have leafed out from a very late frost. And at the time of filming and uploading that video, my forecast low for Thursday night was 35 degrees, and my forecast low for Friday night was 34 degrees. So I was looking to have a frost event. And this is where you need to know your microclimate as a gardener. I live in what they call a frost pocket. It is a cold microclimate because I'm backed up against a low-lying swamp. Now, when we have unusually cold temperatures come in, if the night is going to be windy, the air currents get evenly distributed around the area. So if I know it's going to be a fairly breezy night, I know that my low temperature is going to be almost exactly as forecast. And that is what happened to me on Thursday night. Thursday night was very windy, and with the 35-degree forecast low, I hit exactly 36 degrees Fahrenheit as my low. So it was almost dead on. My concern was Friday night because my Friday night low was downgraded. It was revised down to 30 degrees Fahrenheit. And because I live in a frost pocket, I know that it's typical on calm nights that I'm going to be anywhere from 3 to 5 degrees colder than forecast because the cold air settles here. And that is exactly what happened to me. I hit a low of 28.2 degrees Fahrenheit last night, Friday night, at my property, and I knew this was coming, so I had to revise my strategy. I could no longer protect against frost. I now had to protect against a hard freeze, and that is exactly what I did. Protecting against a hard freeze in the middle of the winter is pretty easy because all of your dormant deciduous trees are very resistant to cold at that point, but the game totally changes when everything starts leafing out with tender new growth that is all highly susceptible to freeze. So luckily I still had half a roll of 1 ounce garden fabric, and it wasn't enough that I could actually cover my fig trees. So all my espaliered in-ground fig trees, what I did was I just clipped it to all of my stakes, all of my trellis. That way it would act as a wind barrier, because my thought was, if it frosts on my fig trees, this will protect frost from the front, and it usually doesn't frost against the back of the fence. And it didn't frost, but the problem is, when it's 28 degrees Fahrenheit, you don't need frost to have damage. The hard freeze itself causes damage. So I want to show you what happened to all of my trees, which were just leafing out, and they were looking absolutely gorgeous. So here I have my little frost guard right here, and that picture I just showed you was my Martinenca ramata. It was just looking beautiful and way ahead of schedule. Now I'm going to take you behind and I'm going to show you that same Martinenca ramata. And this is the carnage that is now my once beautiful Martinenca ramata. Just look at that. It is burnt to a crisp, and that is despite the protection. It looks like that the green growth probably is going to make it okay, but I'm obviously going to lose all of the leaves. It's just crushed. It looks like something that happens around here in November or December. It's not looking good, and none of the other figs are looking good either. They are all completely burnt back. They're shot. The buds right here that you see are still good. They will recover, but I'm just going to be set back basically an entire month. I mean, this is just look at my poor Smith tree here. This was looking great. It was setting figs. You know, it's hard to accept, but you know, the reality is the wood is fine on these trees. The buds will come back. Everything's just going to be way behind in the season. And instead of getting figs in August, I probably am going to be relegated to late August, early September. Hopefully we don't get another freeze event, and hopefully there won't be any dieback on these trees. But it's just a darn shame. But as frustrating as this all is, the reason why I'm taking the time to make this video is because I'm trying to tell you that although it hurts when this happens, it's not the end of the world, because these perennial trees will come back. There's no dieback on the wood. The buds will still survive. It's just a little bit heartbreaking to be set back like this. Now I have a number of trees that are still covered, and it's still supposed to get down to 38 degrees Fahrenheit tonight, so I don't want to uncover a lot of them. However, for the purposes of this video, I'm going to pull this trash bag off this persimmon. So I just want to show you how even covered these very cold hardy trees, the new tender growth is so susceptible to frost and freeze. And just look at this. This is a hardy Asian persimmon. And it's all the new tender growth is burnt to a crisp. So I'm going to lose all of that growth, even though I covered it and there was no frost that formed on this tree at all because of the cover. This just froze completely through, and the only way that you can really protect against this is to put Christmas lights in the cover and add some kind of external heat source to keep that temperature up, because once you get a hard freeze like this, it's just brutal. Just the other day, I was celebrating the fact that my dwarf Orinoco banana here had survived the winter. I was getting all new green growth coming out of this pseudo stem right here. So I put a bag over that, and look at it. Ugh. This was just all new and green, a nice new leaf, and now it looks like a used handkerchief. Ugh, and it smells like rot. It smells like an old stinky bag of tea, and it's just shot. Despite covering it, despite it being protected in this corner here, it didn't matter. A hard freeze is going to do what a hard freeze is going to do, and these non-hardy plants, they're not set up so their cell walls can expand as the water inside their tissues freeze, because when the water freezes inside, the cell walls, they don't give. They just explode as the ice expands. So they turn to ice, and then they just decompose into mush. Now, I'm going to hope that this pseudo stem in here is still alive, so maybe I'll just lose this first leaf. But again, this is going to set me back at least 2 weeks with this banana. So my likelihood for getting fruit was low to begin with. Now it's even lower. So up until this point, this video has been nothing but blood and guts, so let me try and stay on the positive for a little bit. My cold crops, my cilantro laughs at 28 degrees, my dill laughs at 28 degrees, same thing with the thyme, same thing with the parsley. All of my Swiss chard is looking beautiful. That's some red Russian kale, more red Russian kale, all looks gorgeous. This is dwarf blue curly kale. This is starting to flower. We have to make sure we pick that off because we don't want our kale to flower or it'll go to seed. This is some new romaine lettuce growing. More chard, more kale. I have more seedling lettuces coming up, totally undamaged. We have purple and green cabbage. We have spinach, which is almost ready for picking. We have this gorgeous red romaine. All that looks great. These are new plantings of kale and lettuce in here. They're all completely undamaged, except maybe this one right here. That looks a little sad. I think we need to add some water to this bed. Romaine's kind of wimpy when it's young, so looks like I may have gotten 2 seedlings here. Probably didn't survive the hard freeze, but the majority of it looks pretty good. The asparagus looks great. It's all doing fantastic. The beets laughed it off. The radishes and carrots all laughed it off. I have more mature cabbage over there that could not care less at the hard freezes. I have some peas. These are snap peas that are just starting to come up. They took it just fine. Of course, the onions and the shallots are a-okay. The garlic is a-okay. Everything underneath the greenhouse, the hinged hoop house, is a-okay. And of course, all of the garlic is looking great. But a couple of weeks ago, I actually planted my tomatoes, and I hate to tell you, but there is more carnage that I have to show you. So a couple of weeks ago, I started planting my tomatoes because we hadn't had a frost since March 9th, and the 14-day forecast was looking great. It looked like we were out of the woods, and our normal last frost date here is about March 20th. So I started planting them, and when I saw we were going to get likely a hard freeze, I had to double protect them. So a couple of weeks ago, I showed you how to use gallon milk jugs as greenhouses. They work tremendously well. The problem is my tomatoes are now so mature that they would no longer fit under them. So I had to switch to nursery containers. I used nursery containers, and then after putting them on, I covered them with tarp for an added layer of protection. And the goal was for the tarp to keep the frosts off and hold in additional heat, and then you take the nursery containers and then you grind them into the soil to lock in the earth heat, and you get double protection. Now here's where the lessons learned came in. My theory worked absolutely beautifully. The problem was my execution. I took these containers and I placed it on top of my tomato plants, and then I ground it into the soil like that to try and hold in the soil heat, and I took the mulch and soil and I put it around the container to not let any of the heat out, and then I covered it with the tarp and put a brick on top of it. Here's my problem. A lot of these containers had these center holes for drainage here, and every single container that I used to cover these plants that had that center hole in them, there is damage to the tomato plant, and it's right where that center hole was. So all of this right here is dieback. I'm going to lose this flower cluster. It's dead, it's gone. This is dead. These side branches, they are all dead. You can see total damage. So if I would have taken this right here and just put a piece of duct tape over this hole, I wouldn't have had this problem. So the tarp itself does not protect against the hard freeze. This container right here did. This container was locking in the heat from the ground, and it was providing an easy 4 degrees of protection. The problem is, where cold air was able to get in through this hole, it burnt those pieces of the tomato. So let that be a lesson to you. You can use the nursery containers, but you have to cover up these holes. You have to put duct tape and cover up each of these holes so you don't let any cold air leakage in, and apparently the tarp isn't enough to do its job. And you can see this consistently throughout all my crops. Right here where there was nice new growth forming, there's dieback. Same thing, there's some dieback on here. Everything that was covered with these milk jugs, because they had a cap on it, they were totally fine. So those plants are okay. There's clearly dieback here, so I'm going to lose this growth right here. This plant was covered by a container that didn't have a center hole for drainage, so it's a-okay. Same thing with this plant. There's no damage to it because it didn't have a center drainage hole. This one is it's injured, but it may not lose all of this growth. We'll see. That may need another day. This one's a-okay. This plant right here was covered by the milk jug, so there's no damage on that. And this one looks like there's a little bit of freeze damage on this leaf right here. So all of these tomato plants are going to recover. Again, it's just a matter of having my season pushed back a little bit. So we have another 38-degree low coming in tonight. So I'm going to cover them all again, just in case 38 degrees turns into a frost, and it probably will here. Then after that, it looks like that we're clear with lows in the 50s until the middle end of April. So I'm pretty confident that this is going to be our last frost freeze event. But let that be a lesson to you. Learn from my mistake. Otherwise, you are going to have plants that look like this, and you're going to have to cut them all back. Now for a little bit of good news. The best protection in my entire yard simply came from the south wall of my house. And that's what I'm showing you right here. Everything up along the south wall of my house, thanks to the radiative heat of the brick, fared well. I did not bother to cover my Owari Satsuma because it's so cold hardy, despite the fact that it is covered with new blooms and new shoots. But everything here for the most part looks good. There's probably a little bit of frost or freeze damage on these brand new shoots, but I don't really care because this plant is so vigorous. I'm just not worried about this thing at all. These things are almost bulletproof. My avocado, I don't want to uncover yet because we might get another frost tonight. However, I'll pull up the bottom just to show you what it looks like under here. Everything on this avocado is totally fine. Here you can see there are flowers in full bloom. There's been a lot of flower overlap. I'm getting both male and female flowers. This tree is pretty much bulletproof in a 28-degree hard freeze as long as you cover it. I did learn the hard way that 26 degrees Fahrenheit will kill the avocado flowers. We had a low forecast of 32 back in early March, and it wound up being 26. They totally blew the forecast, so I did not cover my avocado, and 26 degrees turned a whole bunch of the flowers brown, and they died back completely. However, they've since been replaced by new buds, so everything is fine with the avocado because I still have Christmas lights under here. Then right next to it is my Meyer lemon. There's still Christmas lights on there. I cover that with a plant jacket. I know that's going to be totally fine. Here is the most frustrating thing for me right now. Here I have a fig tree that I'm going to cull because I'm going to cull it. I did not bother to protect it at all, and it is just totally fine. So this tree, in a 28-degree hard freeze, right up against the house, completely uncovered, is totally fine, but everything out in the open that was covered is damaged. So that goes to show you how much protection there is on the south wall of your house, especially if you are in a brick house. Then in my greenhouse, I moved my new citrus trees that I'm going to plant in ground later. There's a kumquat, a caracara, and a brown select Satsuma. They are totally fine in there. Then I have my Moro blood orange, and I have my Excalibur red line here that I just simply threw a sheet over up against the house. All the blooms are fine. I actually covered my new blueberry bushes with a tarp because they were in full bloom and I didn't want to lose any of my flowers. And you can see all of the blueberries that I've already set on here. I really wanted to protect these because I'm going to put them in the ground soon. And I want to end this video on an upbeat note. I took all of my fig trees and I put them in this little corner right here against the east facing wall of my house. I clustered them all together and I put this frost blanket on that I have linked in my Amazon storefront. I put a couple of pieces of wood in there just to hold the blanket on so the wind wouldn't blow it off, and everything sailed through. The only areas that have some damage are areas where the frost blanket rested against the fig trees. So these fig trees were actually holding, the tall fig trees were holding the frost blanket up. So the frost blanket completely froze and it contacted this new growth right here. And anywhere where the frost blanket contacted the trees, there is dieback. However, everything underneath it is totally fine. Here you can see the dieback where the blanket touched, and then everything underneath it is a-okay. So I'm happy to say my container fig trees protected by the house and this blanket, they shouldn't be set back at all. You can see there are Breba figs all over the place. So at least I should have a decent container fig season. It just stinks that my in-ground trees are set so far back. And I specifically wanted to save this unveiling for the end of this video. To the left is my Celeste fig tree, which is always the first one to bud out. It was looking just incredible. And to the right is my mature dwarf Orinoco banana. It was sending 3 pseudostems full of new green growth, and I had a great chance of fruiting this tree this year. I was almost guaranteed to get bunches of bananas off of it. So I'm going to remove this plant jacket and I'm going to show you what's underneath. And that is what I'm looking at here. And there's my Celeste fig tree right there. This thing looked perfect. It was just gorgeous. It was coming alive. It was setting figlets already, and look at it now. It just looks like used green tissues. It looks horrible. This is set back probably an entire month. The bananas are just as sad. These were beautiful green stalks. They were looking great. And now look at them. They look like an old pair of underwear. Just heartbreaking. So who knows if I'll get any fruit off of this tree now. I was probably looking at 2 or 3 bunches of bananas. So despite how pitiful and pathetic the green foliage looks, these green stems are still alive, so they will send new growth. It's going to set us back, but the tree will recover and we will wind up with fruit off of it at some point this season. And here you can see several green buds. Those buds are a-okay. So over the next couple of weeks, they're going to bud out and they're going to produce new foliage. So all hope is not lost. And this is a testament to just how bad the freeze damage is. Even the clover patches growing in my lawn are all burnt back and they're turning to mush. It's actually killing the clover. That is how unseasonably cold it was. So those are the results of the hard freeze on my garden and some of the lessons that I learned so I can best protect against this event if it happens again in the future. So again, the purpose of this video isn't to be a woe is me. This happens to people all throughout the world. Every single season there are late frosts that happen in pockets of the globe every single year. So this is not unique to me. We've all been through this before. What I really want to do with this video is let it serve as motivation, because although it has set me back, the season is not lost. We're just going to be a little late this year, and it's going to be very interesting to follow the garden progress throughout the year, and you will see how everything recovers and grows out of this shock. Nothing was outright killed. It will come back, and within the next 3 to 4 weeks, everything's probably going to look pretty good once again. And I hope that you'll follow the recovery of the garden as I progress. I'll make sure to have lots of updates. So everybody, I want to thank you all for watching this video. If you found it helpful, please make sure to hit that like button and give it a thumbs up. If you're curious about any of the products that I use in my garden, as usual, they are all linked in my Amazon storefront in the video description. Thank you all again so much for watching, and I hope to see all of you again on the next video.